I have some really important housekeeping.
Yeah, what's up, dude?
Okay, first of all, I'm in Toronto. I'm in my mom's basement. I am 2 floors away from the router. I guess 1.5 floors away from the router. And so I believe that the law here is that you actually aren't allowed to use any sort of like modern Wi-Fi technology. There's actually like some union member. It's in like some union contract. Someone has to actually take the individual packets from floor to floor. The second thing is that behind me,
I got that. That was a good socialism joke.
Behind me in this basement is what I could best describe as a freezer, a fridge freezer combo, and then also some sort of wind machine.
Dude, that's pretty cool. It's a pretty well loaded. I guess that's what you get when you enter the loving embrace of socialism.
I can't believe I'm a millennial recording a podcast in my mom's basement.
Ruch, do you have nothing to say?
Not really, man. I mean,
did you use it up in the last episode?
I did, like I just kind of... Okay, so one thing I do have to say. So I've been thinking a lot about... Okay, so, I watch the news. I read the news. I do all this stuff. And
Richard uses all 5 senses to absorb the news. He watches the news. He reads the news.
I do.
The news. He smells the
I'll
news.
smell the news. Smelling the news is the worst.
I think tasting the news is sexual assault.
Yeah, smelling the news is the worst. Let me tell you. But I think everyone on the news fundamentally does not understand how to analyze Donald Trump. Like, they don't understand it. They use terms that are just like completely sensible if they were describing like a normal politician or a normal like American politician or normal American president, but they don't understand the speak of sort of how dictators operate. And I think it's because they haven't like spent enough time around dictators, right? So Donald Trump he's not a dictator yet, but he's an aspiring dictator, and he certainly has like a dictator's mindset and obviously a lot of respect for dictators. So this Fed chair nomination, right? So, the Federal Reserve is an entity within our government. They set monetary policy. And so Donald Trump gets to nominate the next chair of the Federal Reserve. And people are basing their thoughts of like who Donald Trump will nominate based on like trying to figure out what policies Donald Trump believes in. Or they're saying things like, well, he can't have more chaos, so he'll nominate X person. And it's sort of like, that's not how Donald Trump operates. You know what I mean? That's not how dictators operate. Like, he's going to nominate the last person he has lunch with, or somebody who's like the son of one of his buddies, or one of his buddies' children, or his buddy's son-in-law, or something like that, right? Like, that's how he thinks about things.
Didn't he nominate his son's wedding planner for some like fairly important like welfare administration post or something?
I wouldn't be surprised if he did, but like, this is how he thinks about the world. You know what I mean? And like, people are like, well, he has to get tax cuts done because like he needs a win. And it's like, yeah, a normal politician needs a win. Donald Trump doesn't need a win, Or people are like, well, he won't withdraw from NAFTA because like that would cause a bunch of chaos. Like, that's not how he thinks. He doesn't think like, will it cause too much chaos? Will it hurt people? That's just not the way he thinks. And so, like, I get frustrated sometimes, like, watching the news and having people analyze him through this, like, very normal lens of kind of a rational actor in a normal political world. And he's rational if you kind of apply the dictator's lens to him. And I'm kind of waiting for somebody, like, maybe it's somebody from CNN International that has to do this, that has to be like, listen, I've covered 30 African dictators before. This is what, if you were an African dictator, this is what you would do. You know what I mean?
And Ruch, why wait for CNN? Why don't you do it yourself?
That's what I'm trying to do right here, dude. So, like, he's going to nominate for Fed chair the last person that he has lunch with. Like, if you want to know who the Fed chair is going to be, that's who it's going to be, right? People, like 2 weeks ago, people were saying there's no way he can pull out of the Iran deal, right? Or there's no way that he'll decertify it. And the reason is because it'll look bad to North Korea. In the sense that, like, if we're trying to negotiate with North Korea and not go to war, we want to be keeping our word to other people, right? Or like this, people were saying
He already tweeted that he wants to go to war.
but nobody's taking that seriously. This is kind of my point. Is like people are like, well, he doesn't really want to go to war, right? And again, they apply this like lens on Donald Trump as if he's some sort of rational actor. And I think it does us a lot of bad as a society because we assume that he's eventually going to do the thing that a rational person would do, but just the road that he's going to take is going to be irrational.
Man, how far you've come since our North Korea episode where you were trying to remember our North Korea episode where you were trying to strategize what Donald Trump would be trying to do by antagonizing North Korea?
Well, I was saying, what could the strategy be here, right? Now, I mean, I wasn't saying he had, no, to be clear, I wasn't saying he had a strategy. I was saying, what could the strategy be here? Which is a worthwhile inquiry, I think. But, he sort of proved that he doesn't have one, right? And I think we knew he didn't have one, even at the time. But it was like, okay, well, what could this be, right? Because you do need to think in terms of like counterfactuals, right? And you need to think like you need to scenario plan a little bit. And I think this is my biggest beef is like the media is not scenario planning for the American people. They're applying this like very rational, lens, and viewing his actions through that lens.
Let me ask you this. If they don't do this, if they don't try to understand his actions or not understand, that's not the right word. Like if they
that's
don't
my
try
point.
to,
they're not trying to understand his actions. That's my point.
If they don't try to set him to the standard of a rational actor, isn't that normalizing his conduct in a way?
No, I think the opposite's true, Tom.
So I'm glad you're asking this question. I'm glad you're asking this question actually, because I think what's happening here is you are better off being critical of him if you stop trying to impose a rational framework onto him. You need to say, listen, this is what he's doing. There is no rational framework that explains this, and that is bad.
Can I tell you something important? So like Ruchit, who's like recently come to the realization that the news media is like totally unequipped to cover Donald Trump. I felt that way, that the news media is totally unequipped to cover the entire congressional GOP leadership for years now.
Yeah, but I think I disagree with this because I think this is a form of normalization.
You're going to have to explain that more.
So here's the thing, right? Like, I think that there's a temptation to say, oh, like Trump is sui generis. He's not like a product of the GOP, as a way of saying that, Trump Trump is sui generis and he's not a product of the GOP, and that's a way of saying that like Trump is not normal and we can't normalize him by bringing him into something that is part of what we think of the existing political process. But what if the existing political process is like real bad? Right? Like, what if the mendacity and bad faith of like certain people in Congress has been so deeply rooted, right? And has been so long-standing that like we've normalized it, right? Right? Like maybe Trump and say Paul Ryan really are birds of a feather, and we shouldn't be normalizing either of them. Like maybe they're both not normal, and comparing them to each other is apt.
So if they are not normal, they're not normal in different ways, I think is what I would say. And I think when you kind of crowd them up together, you really, the way Trump is treating, issues with North Korea, the way he's treating our allies, like these are very different, right? The way he's reacting to important world events, and the way he's like handling his sort of executive branch responsibilities, these are not similar to Paul Ryan advancing a hyper-conservative agenda that you don't like.
Actually, I think that I actually think that if Donald Trump cared about domestic policy, you'd basically end up with Paul Ryan. And if Paul Ryan cared about foreign policy, you'd basically end up with Donald Trump.
No, I don't think so at all. There's like almost nothing similar about them. Like Trump's like policies like he just lets Paul Ryan kind of do his domestic policy making for him. But Trump doesn't have any core beliefs really when it comes to domestic policy. And the ones that he does, like being extremely hardline on, being racist on immigration, Paul Ryan's not racist on immigration. Being being like horribly corrupt, personally corrupt, Paul Ryan's not personally corrupt, like engaging in policy to sort of celebrating the fact that like a health insurance company stocks go down because of something that he did. This isn't normal. Like, this isn't a policy debate. Like, I get what you're saying in the sense that you think that like the Republicans don't have a legitimate policy and that they have no ideas and their ideas are horrible and all that stuff. But
like presently, I'm actually talking entirely about a process complaint, right? Like, I think that I think that Paul Ryan's sort of House speakership, right, and McConnell's leadership, right, has just been a series of norms violations, like one after the other. Where like you look at the entire Bicker episode from beginning to end, or things like the sequester, things like that, which I guess wasn't really when Paul Ryan was speakership, but you know what I mean, or the Garland nomination, right? Like, I think the norms violation, like one after the other, I think is of akin to Donald Trump, right? Like, I think that they violate different norms, but I think their cavalier attitude to the way that we think we ought to govern ourselves, I think that they feed back on each other reciprocally. I mean, for example, Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan continuing to tolerate Donald Trump, period, is a continuing norms violation, right? Like, it's a continuing transgression against the Republic.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I think they should not tolerate Donald Trump. Like, but what I guess I'm saying is that because they're tolerating does not make them him. You know what I mean? And on important areas, they are sort of in a very mild way pushing back. Now, like, is that enough? No, it's not enough. You know what I mean? But it's just not the same thing at all.
That's interesting. I think that's an interesting perspective. I think you've actually convinced me a little bit. I think that it's probably fair to say that I spend too much time comparing Trump to Paul Ryan.
Well, I at least Paul Ryan has some beliefs. Like, maybe they're mistaken. You know what I mean? But they're not at their core sort of racist beliefs. You know what I mean?
The line from a movie, right? Say what you will about the tenets of National Socialism. At least it's an ideology.
Sure. Yeah. There you go.
It's the what is that? It's the Big Lebowski, right?
I won't compare Republican ideology to National Socialism, but
no, I'm just comparing you to the Coen brothers.
Oh, well, I guess.
All right, are we gonna go in the order of the Google Doc?
Dude, I can't pull up the Google Doc. I'm having technical difficulties.
Excuse me?
It's okay. You never look at the Google Doc.
Oh my god! On the day that Skype worked the first time we tried, you can't pull up the Google Doc. That's amazing.
Dude, listen, you can't have it all, okay? Like, this is a useful lesson for our young listeners, for our listeners that are under 10, whose parents obviously force them to listen to the show so they can educate themselves. This is a lesson. You can't have it all. You just can't have it all.
Should be in prison.
It's okay, though.
That's also a reference.
Those parents should be in prison?
No, you can't have it all.
What's the reference to?
It's this song. Donald Trump plays a Rolling Stones song at the end of most of his rallies. It's "You Can't Always Get What You Want," which I've always thought is like one of the only things that's like deeply humorous that Donald Trump does. He does it at the end of most of his rallies.
Oh yeah, that was awesome. I love when he does that. Yeah. I think that's really kind of hilarious.
All right, Tom. What's next in the Google Doc, Tom?
Yeah. What's next, Tom?
Oh, no, I just put this 538 article about how the Supreme Court is allergic to math. And there was also this ProPublica article that I'll link to, which says, which basically did an in-depth dive into a lot of Supreme Court opinions and found that they need a fact checker.
Wow, the Supreme Court needs it. Don't they have clerks? Isn't that what the clerks are supposed to do? I don't think they're fact checkers, no. But I mean, like, shouldn't they make sure that the things that go in opinions are factually true?
I guess.
Like, isn't that part of the...
According to ProPublica, they don't. Like, for example, according to ProPublica, one of the statistics that Robert cited in Shelby County is just totally bogus. Shelby County, by the way, is the case where they said that the Voting Rights Act shouldn't, the preclearance shouldn't happen anymore because, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg put it, I'm not getting wet, so I don't need my umbrella.
I'm kind of shocked that the facts are so off.
Are you? Are you actually?
Yeah, actually I am. Like, just facts, like restatement of facts. You know what I mean? Now, I haven't read this ProPublica article, so I don't know if it's like actually like, if it's like kind of like things are sort of argued as opposed to like stated factually, or if like there's just actual like, you know, factual misstatements. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, one of the points that ProPublica makes, and I think you as a lawyer probably would understand how these errors get into the opinions, right? Like, is that these facts that the Supreme Court cites are often due to them being found in amicus briefs, right? And so you'll have like whenever you have a Supreme Court case, you'll have like 10 or 20 amicus briefs from various different organizations filed, right? Like it'll be like, you know, the National Association of Policemen will file an amicus brief in a case that affects their members, or the National Rifle Association will file a brief that affects its members, right? Or its manufacturers. And so what the Supreme Court often does is says, you know, when they're citing facts, will cite to the amicus briefs, or sometimes the underlying citations within the amicus briefs, based on the authority of the organization that is authoring the amicus brief, right? And so I think that is sort of where the factual errors seep into these opinions, is that, you know, at the end of the day, it is an argument to authority. You know, you're assuming that because these people have a fancy sounding name that is related to the subject matter in which you are discussing, they're going to be correct. And that is not always a safe assumption.
That makes sense to me, that error would occur.
Yeah, and I'm sure other times it's just flat out errors, right? Like the legal system itself is not very conducive to ferreting out incorrect propositions necessarily. And what I mean by that is that, you know, in an opinion, you can cite another opinion as the basis of a proposition that you have, right? But what if that opinion got it wrong? Like you know, it's like this. It's almost like a house of cards, right? Like you're just citing things. Yeah.
I cite cases all the time that if I had been the judge, I never would have decided that way.
And you know, I think law reviews also have this problem, right? Like they just sort of it's the entire legal system, right? Like the way we grow up in this common law precedent based system where when you want to assert something, you need to cite something for that proposition, right? And you know, nobody's fact checking that citation.
So I would actually say that part of this is the adversarial nature of law, right? So you think about like science as this like social phenomenon, right? That it's this like collaborative process that you have scientists spread out all over the country that are working towards common goals, and they're peer reviewing each other's papers, and you know there are concerns about reproducibility and things like that, and that the adversarial model of litigation is like exactly the opposite, right? So instead of all of these scientists peer reviewing each other's papers, right, you have like one scientist who's hired because they tend to reach conclusions favorable to manufacturers, and you have one scientist who's hired because he tends to reach conclusions favorable to plaintiffs, and then you just sort of stick them in front of each other, and a lot of what makes them more or less persuasive isn't like how reproducible their work is to other scientists, but how well they come off to a jury or a judge or whatever, right? And that works its way from the bottom up, right? And you may think to yourself like, oh, well, the Supreme Court doesn't have that problem because it's an appellate field and the fact finding's done below, but like, you know, the appellate courts are bound to the factual record below. You know, the Supreme Court takes a lot of liberties by digging into the amicus record or whatever, or just sort of like judicially noticing whatever facts they may want. But that's sort of even worse, right? Because now there are no scientists at all involved. There's just like, you know, some judges that like found something on the internet. So, you know, for the most part, right, like I think the adversarial nature, especially in the common law system, like the adversarial nature of litigation is like inadequate to conduct like significant fact finding in a lot of circumstances. There's also the case that like adversarial litigation focuses on like the burden of proof. So like two parties may have unequal burdens of proof. Like often the plaintiff has a higher burden of proof than the defendant. Right? Like it's the plaintiff's job to prove something to make something more likely than not. Whereas all the defendant has to say is that, oh, well, this seems fairly unlikely to me, but they don't have to posit what really happened. And so often you may have someone who has like the better scientist or has the better of the science or has the most reproducible science, but that party also has a higher burden of proof and so doesn't prevail on some sort of like technical grounds. Anyway, I think this article is good. I think this between the 538 and the ProPublica articles, I think it's very interesting to see judges sometimes do a bad job. What do y'all think?
Everybody makes mistakes, dude.
It's a tough life.
We're not perfect, you know. We make mistakes.
Sometimes when you're an umpire calling balls and strikes.
Sometimes you just don't see the pitch. You know what I mean?
Tom watched Big Mouth according to the Google Doc.
I did. It was good. I enjoyed it. I've only watched a few episodes, but yeah, it was very filthy.
For background, in the last episode 34, my sidebar was Big Mouth. A friend of mine from high school is like on the production team. It's a cartoon on Netflix. It's extremely vulgar. Depends on how vulgar you like your cartoons, but according to Tom, it's very good.
Yeah, it's not as good as Rick and Morty, but you know, what are you gonna do?
Guys, should we talk about Bob Corker? Should we even bother? Should this just be a 22-minute episode?
Do you want to talk about Bob Corker? Is that what you want to do, Ruchit?
No, not really. I mean, like, the Bob Corker conversation is a pretty short conversation. I mean, yeah, it's just a pretty short conversation. I like Bob Corker. I think it's actually. I'm curious. Have any Democrats said that Trump is leading us towards World War III?
All of them. Every single one.
When did they say that? No. I know they don't like Trump, and I know they don't like the way that he's doing things, but have they actually said that?
I'm Googling it right now. I'm doing Richard's homework. I'm doing Richard's homework on the air.
Now, Donald Trump did warn of World War III if Clinton is elected. But did she warn of World War III if he is elected? She did. But has anybody said it lately? I'm just saying maybe Corker deserves a little bit of credit for calling a spade a spade.
I mean, so what your argument is that Corker is the first result on Google when you search for people who say Trump might lead us into war?
I went through pages of results. Hillary Clinton did say it in June of 2016.
Yeah, but that was before the election. That was just when she was trying to win an election. That wasn't honest.
That's true. Now, I'm just saying she could have said it since she lost the election.
No, that wasn't true, Ruchit. I was being sarcastic.
I agree with you, AJ.
Okay, so here's what Hillary Clinton said, according to standard.co.uk. The Evening Standard, it's like a real publication. No, it's a real publication. It's a real thing. Stop giggling.
It is. Sure. They hand that paper out on the tube. Yeah,
writing about President Trump's heavy reliance on alternative facts, the former Democratic candidate said, attempting to define reality as a core feature of authoritarianism. This is what the Soviets did when they erased political distance from historical photos. Well, anyway. Oh, here we go. Mrs. Clinton repeatedly criticizes Donald Trump as, quote, a clear and present danger to the country and the world. There you go. From September of 2017.
Factually true.
So there you go. See, Bob Corker, just copying from Hillary Clinton.
I mean, Clinton, she was just mad she lost the election, right? You see? So I'm just saying when Bob Corker says it, it's got a lot more credibility.
Okay, so I think there actually is something to this idea, right? Which is that, Bob Corker has probably taken up the mantle as, of the Republicans in Congress, the person who has said the most about how not normal Donald Trump is, right? So, credit to Bob Corker there. So I think there are a couple things to take away from that. Like, one, why is it particularly more credible when a Republican says it, as opposed to, say, anyone else? But then second, why is Bob Corker, who has mostly made like personal insults against Donald Trump, right? Like there hasn't been a lot of like substance or policy behind Bob Corker's criticism of Donald Trump, right? He says that Donald Trump is like impetuous or impulsive, or that he has to be managed like he's at a daycare, but he hasn't actually said that like the policy that results from this like poor process is bad, right? So Bob Corker's complaints about Donald Trump are all personality or sort of process oriented, and.
No. I don't think that's true. I think like he disagrees with Trump's policy conclusions on Russia. He disagrees with Trump's policy conclusions, in terms of how he's going about things with Iran. I mean, he clearly disagrees with it on North Korea. So, I think on, and even on healthcare, I mean, like I don't think he disagrees with the Republican policies on healthcare, but, he would rather have Obamacare be repealed. And let's be honest, one of the major reasons that Obamacare hasn't been repealed, well, first of all, it's the Democrats, in their opposition. But the second major reason I would say is because the president's incompetent. He can't actually get his shit together.
Really, it's not because of 3 senators in the Senate who have opposed it, 2 of them consistently and one of them every so often?
Well, no, I think it's because they couldn't actually strike a deal with those folks. You know what I mean? And they can't actually – so the Republicans have been terrible at like actually legislating, number one. Number two, if you're a Republican and you're thinking about getting on board with a policy that you disagree with and you're in the Senate, you might remember when the president praised the House health care bill and then 2 weeks later said it was mean and a terrible bill. So – I mean, these things matter.
I mean, he was right when he said it was mean and a terrible bill. Like, that was accurate.
I think my point. I think my point is that Trump's not very good at getting legislation passed.
Yeah, but perhaps though, repeal and replace. Right? They haven't actually offered anything to replace it with.
No, Tom, I'm saying that like there are lots of bad policies that have become law. But the difference is that they have somebody who's competent managing that legislative process, or they have a president that is able to use whatever power that he has.
I think the point Ruchit is making is that like Bill Clinton or George Bush or whoever it was, like were competent or had competent people under them at navigating the legislative process, and every once in a while they were actually able to achieve bad bills. Like bad bills had been passed under Bill Clinton, for example, right? And why? Because he wanted them to pass, and he actually was fairly skilled at navigating that process, right? So the fact that the BCRA or AHCA or whatever is a bad bill alone isn't sufficient to explain why it didn't pass. You'd also have to say that the White House is incompetent.
Yeah, I think it's undeniable that the White House is incompetent, right? Like the White. I mean, they've had like that picture of like Trump's senior advisors, like taken shortly after election. I think none of them are still there. Like literally none of them.
Stephen Miller's still there.
Actually maybe
Stephen
Gary
Miller's
Cohn.
Still there. So here's my question. Why is it particularly noteworthy for Bob Corker to have said what I think is like a fairly mild thing to say about Donald Trump?
Sure.
Can I give an answer?
Please.
So I'm going to draw on a bit of knowledge from trial advocacy, actually. When you have a bad fact for you, right? Like, let's say you're putting on a trial and you're advocating for your side and there's a bad fact for you. There are 2 ways, there are 2 theories in trial advocacy as to how you can approach that bad fact. One is called the inoculation theory, which, as it sounds, you inoculate the bad fact by saying, you know what, members of the jury, there's this bad fact, but it's not really bad at all because X, Y, and Z, right? The other, that's sort of the traditional way that trial advocates have sort of looked at it, right, is when you have a bad fact, you inoculate it, right? The other way of looking at it is called the endorsement theory, right? And the idea is that, look, jurors are smart enough to realize that we live in an adversarial system and both sides are going to present their sort of best case to them, right? And it's their decision to decide, or it's their role to decide who wins and who loses, right? So when you present a bad fact, you are actually endorsing that bad fact on your side,
but enhancing your own credibility.
No. Your credibility is attached to that bad fact. So, like, if you're putting forth the bad fact first, right? The jurors will think, oh, this bad fact must have much more importance than it actually does, because I know both sides are only supposed to give me their best case, and the fact that one side is giving me a bad fact means that this bad fact is a lot more important than it actually is.
So, but why would an advocate give a bad fact under that theory?
Well, I mean, there's a whole, sort of rationale. At least I have a few ideas as to when you would inoculate a bad fact versus when you would follow the endorsement theory and just not touch the bad fact, let the other side bring up the bad fact, right?
So do you think Bob Corker is endorsing the bad fact? The bad fact, I guess, being Trump?
Yes. So when
and by endorsing, you mean he's saying that Trump is bad, or he's endorsing Trump?
So that's the way to look at this situation, right? Like, we are the jury, right? The American public is the jury, right? And we know that the Republicans are against the Democrats, and the Democrats are against the Republicans, and the Republicans are going to be bringing out good things about themselves and bad things about the Democrats, and the Democrats are supposed to be bringing out good things about the Democrat policies and bad things about the Republican policies. Right? When a Republican brings out or attacks a Republican, it has that much more importance in our mind, because in our adversarial system, we know, hey, they're only supposed to be bringing out their favorable case. The fact that he is doing something that seems unfavorable to his side, that must have that much more importance. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the endorsement theory, or the endorsement view. In trial
But how does the endorsement theory help Bob Corker?
This isn't an explanation of how it helps Bob Corker. That wasn't the question. The question...
It's an explanation of, like, why is it, like, particularly noteworthy that Bob Corker is saying these things?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure, okay.
So I think it's like a very long way of saying that, like, it's interesting to see a Republican speak out against a Republican.
Yeah. Because when a Republican speaks out against their own party, we put more weight on that, because they're not supposed to be doing it, as opposed to when a Democrat speaks out against a Republican. And perhaps that's why we don't see any articles about Democrats saying that it's the end of the world, Trump is elected, because that happens so much that it's not newsworthy.
Well, I mean, we hear all the time, that the media reports Democratic critiques of Trump, like, all the time. I mean, there's no shortage.
I mean, but it happens all the time that maybe it's not all that newsworthy.
So are Americans so used to the state of partisanship that it's, like, noteworthy when a Republican member of Congress says something that is just, like, totally obvious?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Right, like, you can think about, like, the 1960s when, like, conservatives refused to vote for Barry Goldwater, like Nelson Rockefeller and whoever, like, were, like, pretty vocal about it. And
those things were newsworthy too,
like,
right? Obviously.
And then you look at, like, France just last year when the conservatives all voted for Macron over Le Pen, even though Le Pen was probably a much closer policy mix for them. But anyway, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the noteworthy thing in America isn't, like, Bob Corker. It's, like, all the rest of the GOP.
Yeah, I mean, he's the example that proves the rule, right? Or the exception that proves the rule, rather. And that's what makes him that's what makes it newsworthy. But so are you guys familiar with, like, when Senator William Fulbright of Arkansas, like, this was back in the 60s,
big racist,
came out against when he came out against the Vietnam War? You guys remember reading about that or know anything about that?
Read about that. I don't remember it from the time.
Yeah, I wasn't alive either, but so when I read about it in articles and in history, his turning against LBJ, he was a Democrat, Southern Democrat, just like LBJ. He turned against LBJ and against the Vietnam War, and that had a big effect on public opinion. At least this is what I've read, right? And he made a case for why this was a bad war, a stupid war, so on and so forth. And he was actually somebody that sponsored the original Tonkin Gulf of Tonkin resolution that led to the Vietnam War. So, his changing of his mind was an important thing to change, that began to change the mind of the country, right? It's not as if it did it on its own, but it was certainly an important factor. And I'm hopeful that that's sort of akin to sort of what's happening here with Bob Corker. I don't know if it will end up being, but...
All right. Selfishly, selfishly, I've been setting this all up to debut what I think is really what's surprising about the whole situation. I think that we collectively underrate how many cues that people pick up from politicians about what to think or believe. Right. I mean, I think often our mental model of politics is that there are sort of two populations in the country that have, each have their own policy mix. So there's like one population that like is pro-gay marriage and one population that's anti-gay marriage. And then politicians sort themselves out to like serve a clientele. And I think the reality is much closer to the opposite, that people get their conclusions by looking at their leadership, the politicians that they identify with. So I think probably people have a couple like core foundational beliefs, and they use those foundational beliefs to pick which politicians they want to self-identify with, and then those politicians and then tell those people what to believe. Right. So if you look at, I'll try to find this to put in the show notes. If you look at like opinion polling on the NFL, right, that can, the conservatives and Democrats, or conservatives and liberals, or Democrats and Republicans, or whatever, basically had the same opinions towards the NFL for the last couple of years. And their sort of favorability goes up and down sort of in lockstep. And then the Trump thing happened, and suddenly the two graphs just diverge. Right. The people that picked up their cues about the NFL controversy with Kaepernick and everyone else has been going on for like several years now, and it's only in the last like couple weeks where you can see those graphs really diverge. The people pick up what to think from their leading politicians. The same with like a public opinion polling towards Putin. Like the graphs like totally diverge in the middle of 2016 when suddenly Putin is this like divisive figure in the election, right? I think that negative partisanship is probably the most powerful political force in the country. And so the idea of like this sort of like tribal affiliation, or like belonging to the same people that have the same beliefs as you is like more powerful, right? Like measuring yourself in opposition to the people that you dislike, right? So like tying closer to your tribe by negating what you perceive to be beliefs of the other side is probably the most powerful force in all of politics. Probably, definitely in the United States, but probably like in Western democracy, like probably in Europe and Canada too. And so what you end up with here is that like the thing that is notable about Bob Corker, right? The thing that is notable is that if you actually believe that, if you actually believe that people get their cues about what to believe from their politicians, then what you were saying, right, with Fulbright turning against the Vietnam War and that being a turning point and people actually starting to change their minds about it, is that you have to actually believe that like the congressional GOP could do something to save the country from Trump if they wanted to, but they don't. I think partly it's a collective action problem. I think partly it's something that they would like to do and they haven't been able to organize themselves in order to do it. And I think partly it's a lack of will. I think a lot of them, like Rohrbacher or Steve King or whoever, actually like the status quo.
Yeah, I think they certainly could do it. You know what I mean? And I think that they haven't, and maybe they will, maybe they won't. I mean, I think it's the modern day like Republican Party, especially in Congress, is like just it's such a joke in so many ways, right? Like these are grown men and women, right? All of whom got to their place in life because they had quite a bit of ambition, and they had quite a bit of self-confidence. And over the last 9 months or so.
And I think a genuine desire to help.
Yeah, I agree. And a genuine desire to advance their policy views, right? And here, in the last 9-ish months, they've let this guy who's not that smart, who doesn't care that much about the country, and who certainly doesn't know anything, just attack them incessantly as a way of defending his own incompetence. And then that person that I'm referring to is obviously Donald Trump. But the fact that these people who, 10 months ago or 11 months ago were filled with ambition have basically allowed someone to run roughshod all over them and blame them for everything that's going wrong in the country. I mean, I think Trump has spent more time blaming the Republicans than he has spent blaming the Democrats, or at least he hasn't spent much less time blaming the Republicans than he has spent blaming the Democrats. So it's sort of like, where are their balls?
Whoa.
You know what I mean?
We're post-gender. Off-brand.
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 Off-brand. Where are their guts? Where are their guts? Are we post
post-digestion
or post?
Yeah. So here's the thing I would say to that, right? Like you would say, oh, like where are their guts? Where's their gumption? But you know what? Like, remember when Ted Cruz, like, for like 3 months during the government shutdown in 2013, like, briefly created himself as the most powerful Republican in Congress? Right. Like, the GOP is like an institution who's been susceptible to these sort of insurgents. I mean, basically, as long as the three of us have been adults.
But like at least John Boehner was like, no, F you, Ted Cruz. You know what I mean? And a lot of people spoke out about like how terrible Ted Cruz was. You know what I mean? And you pretty much don't have any Republicans doing that. And the irony of this entire situation is that maybe the reason they're not doing it is because they care so much about their policy views that they think that if they just swallow their pride and let Trump continue beating up on them, they'll get their policy.
I think if they can get $1 trillion of tax cuts, if they can get $1 trillion of tax cuts and name Anthony Kennedy's successor in the Supreme Court, it'll all have been worth it. Right. I mean, even when the Supreme Court has to move,
and so is that something
when the Supreme Court has to hear oral arguments in some sort of fallout shelter underground because we're all irradiated, right? It'll all have been worth it to them.
So here's the thing: is that shameful on their part, or is that admirable? Right? And by that I mean like they care so much about their convictions, and about their policy preferences and their Supreme Court justice that they will demean themselves, you know, and allow Trump to demean them for that. Is that in some strange way admirable? I don't know. It's just kind of funny. Because, like, if they were as petty as he was, right, they would just attack him back, and then there would be a civil war, and then they wouldn't get any of their policies, you know, or they'd have even less of a chance of getting any of their policies. So, like, what's worse? What's worse?
What's the difference between that scenario and right now?
Well, no, I'm saying that, like, what's worse if they didn't bite their tongue and attack Trump, you know what I mean, and had like a sense of spine, you know, or that they are willing to basically sacrifice all, including their own personal egos, to advance policies that they believe in. Like, I mean, you know what I'm getting at. You know that it's kind of like, it's hilarious. Like, in some way, it's like, I hate to say the word "should you admire them," you know what I mean? Because I certainly don't. But it's almost like, wow, they're taking a lot of shit just for the hopes of advancing their policy agenda. Like, if I were a Republican voter, maybe you should appreciate that. I don't know. I don't appreciate it as an American, I guess, but it's just sort of funny. And I'm waiting for them to sort of turn on him, but they just don't. They just don't care about their own egos. It's weird.
Here's the thing. Wouldn't they get more of their policies passed if it were President Mike Pence?
They would. So I think so. Yeah, I think they would. So it's like maybe then it goes back to incompetence. Like maybe they're not competent enough.
Like, yeah, it seems to me that if what they really cared about was passing their policies, they've had several opportunities to impeach this guy, you know, and get Mike Pence in on board.
I mean, I think, and maybe this part of it sort of explains Corker and when he did it, right? Is like maybe he just said, listen, I've put up with this for 10 months now, and it's just not working. And he sort of concluded, we're never getting our policy agenda, and this guy's a danger to the country to boot, you know?
You know, this is really different from how I thought the episode would go. I'm genuinely impressed. I think that sort of I was expecting us to have, if we were going to have an episode where we talk about Bob Corker, I thought we were going to have our sort of McCain conversation again, but more boring. But this is like a real change of pace from where Ruchit was even say like 2 months ago.
No, it's not that different. I think it's a real change of pace from where AJ was 2 months ago. So hey, can we talk about this?
Ruchit's rubber, AJ's glue.
So did you guys hear about this story about the Green Berets that were killed in Niger? So I think this was like something that's important that maybe we should talk about for like 5 seconds at least, or maybe a couple of minutes. But so 3 U.S. Green Berets. So this is October 5th, 2017. 3 Green Berets were killed and 2 others were wounded in southwest Niger. So typically when U.S. soldiers die, the President of the United States calls their families or writes their families a letter or does something to honor them. So today is what, October 17th? Is that right? Yeah, October 17th. So today, Donald Trump got asked, like, hey, dude, it's been like, Mr. President, they were killed on like the 4th of October and it's the 17th. And like, why haven't you like called the families or contacted the families or done anything like that? And so before we get to his excuse as to why he didn't do it, which is pretty shameful in and of itself, I thought maybe it'd be helpful to talk about the things he did have time to do between October 4th and October 17th, since calling the families of these Green Berets was not on that list. So one of the things is he had time to pick a fight with the NFL. Do you guys remember that?
I mean, which time?
Multiple times. Multiple times in those days. Pick a fight with the NFL. He had time to challenge his Secretary of State to an IQ test. He had time to sort of attack ESPN hosts, and the list goes on.
He shot a 73. He did golf. Like, he hit a 73 on like a par 71 course when he went out with Lindsey Graham.
That's pretty good.
It's really good if that was actually his score.
Yeah, which it almost certainly wasn't.
Is this like a North Korean situation where like when he was 12, he got 3 bullseyes with a blindfold on?
Yeah. So that's another like dictatorship thing, right? Dictators brag about like their feats, like feats of strength or feats of like, athleticism, or in Vladimir Putin's case, they walk around shirtless riding a horse, So Trump didn't do that. And then today he talked about like why he didn't do that. And maybe I'll let one of you guys take over here in terms of what his explanation was and what he said about President Obama.
Didn't he say he just hadn't gotten around to it yet, that he might do it later, but that he's called more military families than any previous president ever did, and he doesn't think that the last 2 presidents ever did it? Isn't that basically what he said? He's like, oh, Obama and Bush never called military families?
Yeah.
Yeah, he said the last 2 presidents never did it, and then he amended his statement to say they rarely did it. Then he couldn't stop there. Then he said, no, I don't think Obama, in a later interview, he said, no, I don't think Obama called the parents of wounded or of troops that had been killed in action. Just ask John Kelly if he got a call from Obama.
Yeah, John. So there's this Washington Post article about how Kelly was trying to keep his son's death out of politics until Trump brought him in.
So John Kelly's son, I guess, passed away in 2010. He was killed in action. And so Kelly had spent, I guess, the last 7 years trying to honor his son in private, right? Which makes a lot of sense. You don't want to talk about these things a lot of times when these sorts of terrible things have happened to you. And Trump sort of today kind of just cavalierly was like, yeah, go ahead and ask John Kelly about it.
Seems rude.
It was just it was kind of cruel, actually, I thought. And it reminded me of sort of the cruelty that he had, and it's not funny, but it's so classically Trump, right? He says nobody's treated the families of veterans that have passed away better than he has, when about a year ago he was attacking the Khan family whose son had died in Iraq.
Well, and he said he likes soldiers who weren't captured, right?
Yeah, and then he'd of course attacked John McCain as well. It's just a complete lack of like just human decency. You know what I mean? And I think it comes back to like that's where I think this is a little bit different. And some days I think like, is it better to just say like, listen, Trump's policies are terrible, and have that debate, or is it better to say, listen, it has nothing to do with policies. Like, he is a terrible leader. He cannot. I mean, he's just not capable of actually getting anything done. And then on top of that, he's like a terrible human being who, if your children grew up to be like him, you would be really, really embarrassed if they went around attacking like, the families of fallen soldiers. And I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, there is a difference, I think, but like, I don't know which one is a better just sort of point to be making to people that are either on the fence or, maybe voted for him, whether it was begrudgingly or not.
I think AJ's Canadian internet finally caught up to him.
No, I'm here. Yeah. It's difficult. I don't know. I guess I don't have an answer. I don't know why. Tom, what do you think?
I think I want to lay on the floor and wait to die.
All right. Do you want to do Supreme Court predictions?
I guess.
No, dude, let's save them for next episode. Let's let this be a short episode. Let's end on the somber note.
Let's do one case.
We can do one case. Let's do one case. It's about arbitration.
Oh, now Tom, you just know how to push my buttons.
Okay, so this is Epic Systems Corp v. Lewis. And the issue in Epic Systems Corp v. Lewis is, does the National Labor Relations Act prohibit the enforcement of an agreement requiring employees to resolve disputes with the employer through individual arbitration under the Federal Arbitration Act? So that was a mouthful. Let me break it down a little bit. In this case, the court's trying to resolve this conflict between the FAA, the Federal Arbitration Act, and the National Labor Relations Act. AJ's Favorite Act, right, AJ?
Keep going.
The FAA states that arbitration agreements shall be valid, irrevocable, and enforceable. The National Labor Relations Act creates a civil right to employees to engage in concerted activities for the purpose of collective bargaining or other mutual aid or protection. And in this case, the plaintiffs want to create a class action against the defendant, Epic, their employer. Epic forced its employees to sign an arbitration agreement. I guess listen to our episode on arbitration agreements if you'd like more information about that. That prevents class actions. Lewis argues, the plaintiff argues, that the court below and the court below found that enforcing employees to sign an arbitration act that prevented class actions violates the National Labor Relations Act because the employee has a right to engage in these concerted activities for their mutual aid and protection, and a class action is, in plain language, a concerted activity for their mutual aid. And so that's the issue. Does the FAA trump, or does the concerted activities language of the National Labor Relations Act trump?
Dude, I hate this case.
Why?
I hate what the outcome is going to be, which is that they're going to...
What do you think the outcome?
They're going to find that the Arbitration Act trumps the National Labor Relations Act.
Yeah.
And the reason they're going to do it is because they're going to say that they're going to talk about the policies favoring arbitration. They're going to talk about how this would frustrate the purpose. It's not a preemption issue because it's not a state law that we're talking about. We're talking about a conflict between two different federal laws. Now, theoretically, I think you could say that the National Labor Relations Act was probably passed after. I bet that clause in the National Labor Relations Act was passed after the National Arbitration Act, which was, I think, in the 1920s, actually, or the Federal Arbitration Act, rather.
Yeah.
But they're going to say it wasn't specific enough, and that go ahead.
Those questions for you. So that statute of the National Labor Relations Act was enacted in 1935 and then amended in 1947. And drum roll, please. The section of the FAA was enacted in 1947. It was passed, so the FAA was enacted on July 30th, 1947, and the last amendment to the National Labor Relations, that section in play, was June 23rd, 1947. So either way you look at it, the National Labor Relations Act was enacted first.
I see. Anyway, I think this is going to be a 5-4 decision. I think Kennedy's going to write the... I don't even know if he's going to write the majority opinion, but he's going to be the swing vote, obviously. And this is based on the Concepcion case, which is the most recent big arbitration case that was decided in 2011, AT&T Mobility versus Concepcion, which was also a class action case, and it involved a California law that wanted that said that in consumer contracts you cannot waive, or that consumer contracts the corporation cannot put a clause in there that waives the consumer's right to class action arbitration, and Kennedy was in that 5-4 majority there. I imagine he will be again.
I have a question. Is the argument that the Labor Relations Act says that employers can't require these sort of arbitration clauses in their employment contracts because it's a violation of employees' ability to collectivize? Or is it that these contracts are unenforceable because enforcing them would violate the employee's right to collectivize?
Well, so the issue presented is written as does the National Labor Relations Act prohibit the enforcement of an agreement requiring employees to resolve disputes? But the core legal issue is we have two federal statutes which have a seeming conflict, and so this is a question of statutory interpretation, right? And so what we're trying to interpret is, does the language of the National Labor Relations Act, which states that employees have a civil right to engage in other concerted activities for the purpose of collective bargaining or other mutual aid and protection, does a class action fit that language? Is a class action a concerted activity, right? A group of employees getting together for the purpose of collective bargaining. Yeah? What's your vote?
I think it's going to be 7-2 against labor.
So
7-2?
Epic.
Dude, you're insane. There's no way the liberal justices are going to vote for this.
Was Concepcion a 5-4?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it was.
Okay,
I looked it up.
I'm going to change my vote to 6-3.
Who's going to be the liberal justice that comes over?
Kagan or Breyer. So my 7-2 was Kagan and Breyer, but now I think it's Kagan or Breyer.
I think if anybody comes over, it's going to be Breyer, but I don't think it's going to happen this time.
Yeah, that's why I changed it to 6-3.
Maybe I'm in a despondent mood, but I think it's going to be 9-0. Epic.
Wow. I hope we're all wrong.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I think this will really... So, one of the fears that people had, which came true with the Concepcion case, was that if you made it impossible for consumers to, file class actions in consumer cases, that would basically eliminate those lawsuits, right? Because who's going to sue AT&T individually for having overcharged them $20, right? I think something similar could happen here. I think that there are a lot of times when individual employees have, relatively small claims. So let's say you're an employer and, you've just sort of you just haven't been paying overtime, and you're just kind of doing it across the company, and you've stiffed the average employee out of $900 or $1,000, something like that, right? If you've done that to 5,000-10,000 employees, that's a lot of money, obviously, if you did it to 10,000 employees, that's $9 million right there. But those individual employees are not going to bring those cases at $900 a pop, right? And I think that's precisely what, obviously that's precisely what the companies want, right? And that's precisely what what I think, sadly, I think the justices are going to allow. I really can't wait for the day when these laws go away. It can only happen when Democrats control the House and the Senate and the presidency. That's the only way this will happen. And even then, it might not happen. These are really terrible laws. And the thing is, I've talked about this before on the show, but they swing the balance of power. Employees already don't have that much power. Especially if they're blue-collar workers or, even if they're white-collar workers, frankly. But they already don't have that much power when it comes to negotiating with their employer. And then as you take more and more power away from them, that I think has a real role in suppressing wages and suppressing labor mobility and in furthering inequality. It's one of these things that doesn't really get discussed, I think, that much. We think about inequality and things like that at a much higher level, but I think there's probably dozens of little pieces of policy like this one that make it harder for people to get a slightly higher wage. And when you do that for decades and you keep piling things on top of each other that make it harder for people to get a higher wage, you wake up and you do have stunning kind of income inequality.
Well, I think Rich is right.
It's interesting, right? Because like I think from like a, I've talked about like kind of how I like Macron, for example, and AJ. We don't have to get into that debate again, but I think like in some ways, like I think like labor laws don't need to be so strict as to make it hard to like fire someone or hard to hire someone. But I think we have to be like very careful in terms of the bargaining power and making sure that we aren't sort of stacking the deck against employees. And I think that happens in ways other than just like how easy is it to hire and fire somebody. It happens in stuff like this. To me, this is like I mean, you guys got me started, Tom. Like, good job, I guess. But this is when people put these types of clauses in these contracts, it's a type of fraud. Honestly, it's you're defrauding your employees, like, effectively, is what you're doing. And there has to be a better way to make profits than to do that.
You're not going to find much disagreement here, I don't think.
No, I know.
Sidebar?
Dude, sidebars.
Rich, you go first.
Dude, I don't have a sidebar today, dude.
Why not?
I couldn't get into the Google Doc, dude. Oh, you know what? I can follow up. I listened to so remember a few episodes ago when I said I was going to start taking a class on appreciating music? Well, I've started the class. It's pretty good.
What do you appreciate? Did you appreciate
that's your
music?
grand review?
Yeah, I did. He has so it's this Yale class. I think it's a guy named Craig Wright is the professor. And so in the first episode, he has you listening to different pieces of music. And he explains the difference between like rhythm and tempo and things like that. I mean, I'm just one class in, Tom. Like, I can't like sit here and, give you
Tom, remember when
everything,
Rich was going to do like a class a week and report in every week on the show?
I just reported. This was my report on the first class.
It's more than a month later.
Dude, things have been going on.
Hold on. He said that he was going to do this on April 9th, 2017.
No, dude, you're
episode
lying,
10.
Dude. It was, no, I didn't. No,
episode
I didn't,
10, everything we know about the FCC.
Dude, this is not true. This is not true.
Okay.
I said this like 2 or 3 episodes ago.
Okay. Maybe I'm okay.
Tom, we need the show needs to hire a fact checker for your miscitations of our own show.
It was September 9th, 2017. We're real time fact checking. Yeah, an entire month ago you promised. You swore you made a blood pact to our listeners.
You swore on the honor of your entire family. You brought dishonor to your family for 3 generations.
3 generations.
I mean, at least I'm not Donald Trump. That's all I gotta say.
I got one. I got a good one. Are you ready for a good one? Ryan Zinke? That's it. That's my sidebar. Ryan Zinke.
Oh, the Interior Secretary.
No, okay. Here's my sidebar. It is a article in the politics section of the Washington Post. Democracy Dies in Darkness. Love it or leave it. The title of the article is "Where's Zinke?" ? The Interior Secretary special flag offers clues.
Cool.
He has a personal flag. Apparently, a bunch of the cabinet secretaries have personal flags, and they are entitled. But most cabinet secretaries don't bother. But they're entitled to fly their flag when they are "quote unquote" in garrison, that is present in the building. And so Ryan Zinke has this specific flag for him that when he's at the Interior Department's headquarters, they fly the flag, and when he's not there, but the deputy secretary is there, they fly the deputy secretary's flag.
How low in the totem pole can you go?
Yeah, can we be like can Tom and I be like assistant to the assistant deputy secretary and get our own flag?
Like on Friday, I was the last person to leave the office, and I kind of feel like, once everybody left, I should have gotten to like raise up my flag.
Yeah, exactly.
Who raises their flag when you're not there?
I mean, maybe this can be just a pirate flag that you just hang from one of the poles.
So apparently in like, God, where is it in the article? Apparently in like the late 19th century. Okay, here we go. Personal flags for federal government officials have a proud, if arcane, history that originated with the Secretary of the Navy in 1866 to help sailing ships in the fleet recognize which one carried the naval commander, the Coast Guard, and Secretary of War 112. By the early 20th century, the civilian heads of the Treasury, Commerce, and Labor Department had flags. The first one for Interior was adopted in 1917. Quote, if you were the Secretary of Agriculture, you asked yourself, hey, the Secretary of War has a flag. How come I don't have one? So they have flags.
This is great. It's great.
Who designs these flags?
Ooh, there should be a national competition.
You know what? Betsy Ross. A lot of people don't know this. Betsy Ross turned out like 2 dozen flags, and they've just been keeping them in reserve as they create new cabinet appointments.
My sidebar is Singles Day, which is November 11th. And it is one of the biggest shopping days in the entire world in China. Singles Day has total sales in 2016 that reached $17.8 billion. And now compare that to the combined sales from Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and Cyber Monday together in the United States in 2016 was only $12.8 billion. It's cray-cray, no?
That is cray-cray. Cray-cray.
What does it celebrate?
November 11th, 11/11, Singles Day.
Wait, really?
It's just a day to shop, dude. Yeah. Yeah. It's just a day
yeah.
It's just a day to shop in China.
It is the most important shopping day in China. Oh, yeah. I mean, in the market, like, people follow that, like, basically almost as much, if not more, than they follow Black Friday.
Yeah, like what does Black Friday celebrate? What does Cyber Monday celebrate? What does Thanksgiving celebrate?
Wait, no, Cyber Monday is a national pastime. Everybody gets on the internet and finds someone that they're attracted to and they cyber. That's like a national pastime. Cyber Monday. You do it on a Monday. You do it at work. You close the door in your office and you slack off for half a day and you're cybering on the internet. Everybody does this.
You cover your windows with your personal flag.
You cover your windows with your personal flag. Your windows with your personal flag.
I'd like to say officially, I don't do this. I have to sign off. No, I'm kidding. But I don't do this. That part is true. But guys, I have to go. AJ, enjoy Canada, dude. Gosh, I love Canada.
Canada's great. I'm in Toronto. It's the best. I've been eating the best food. Guys, I went to dinner tonight at a restaurant. I went to a restaurant called Bombay Touch. Their menu, they had North Indian and South Indian food.
Is this a Cyber Monday thing?
North Indian and South Indian. It was like the entire India.
I taught my mom how to eat pani puri. Wait, guys, I'm changing my sidebar. My sidebar is teaching your mom how to eat pani puri.
There needs to be a video of some kind, AJ.
Your pani puri was spicy.
Yeah, that's how it's supposed to be.
I don't know. I guess I'd always thought of it as like sweet.
Yeah, people do not make pani puri properly, like in most restaurants.
Is this like a North Indian thing?
Dude, this is like the right way to make pani puri, you know? I think it's like one of those things where they just put like sugar in everything because they know that like Americans need sugar in everything.
Wait, hey, can we talk for a second about how John Siracusa, copyright follow-up 1948, that John Siracusa liked the tweet that you tweeted at him, Tom?
I mean, is this like just a way to get another like from John Siracusa?
Yes. He's the greatest. He is the greatest podcaster in the history of the medium. And no,
I've never even heard of this guy.
And in 1955, John Siracusa copyrighted follow-up.
I guess.
I have no idea who this person is. Just that you like him, AJ, and
he's the greatest ever podcaster in the history of the medium.
He does good toaster reviews.
No, you don't understand. He liked to tweet that Tom tweeted at him, and I am over the moon. I haven't gotten over this for like 3 days. He's the greatest ever podcaster, and he liked your tweet.
I mean, it just seems like the polite thing to do. It might have been one of his people, dude. I mean,
he doesn't have people.
I want like Donald Trump. Actually, I don't really want this. If Donald Trump tweets at us, we're gonna have like thousands of his fanboys harassing us. So
do you know how there's some guy out there who like invented Velcro or whatever, and now he's just like everybody's like, oh, that's the Velcro guy. Like John Siracusa invented Follow Up in 1989, and now here we are. I'm like, I can't get over myself. He liked Tom's tweet when Tom tweeted at him about our show.
You should tweet at him, AJ. And say, hey, John Siracusa, I saw that you liked Tom's tweet. Listen to our show, John Siracusa. By the way, Ad Good Journalism doesn't know who you are.
Ruchit is so off-brand. Not knowing who John Siracusa is really off-brand.
Tweet at him, Tom. This is good. We need to think about people that we can invite. And I think what we should do is, so did I ever tell you guys about how like in 4th grade and 5th grade, so I was living in Saudi Arabia, and I came up with the idea to write fan mail to get autographed pictures and like, you know, memorabilia from all my favorite athletes at the time. And so I wrote them all individual, like handwritten letters, right? And even in 4th grade, I knew that I should tell them like, hey, by the way, I live in Saudi Arabia. I got all kinds of great fan stuff, dude, for free. Like I got all kinds of like autographed pictures and shit. I got something from Chipper Jones. AJ knows who that is. And Greg Maddux.
He's a pitcher.
Yeah.
He's like one of the best pitchers ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Chipper Jones was one of his teammates, a fantastic third baseman on the Atlanta Braves. My point is, like, I wrote like over 100 athletes, and I got like 20-ish things back. You know what I mean? Like sent all the way to Saudi Arabia, like in the through the postal service. You know what I mean? But what I'm saying is like if we invite like 100 people onto the show, like our hit rate will probably be at least 5 or 10 important people.
And the censors let all the memorabilia through?
No. So actually, what they did is like so. There was a female tennis player whose name I've now forgotten, who sent an autographed picture of herself, but the censors actually like blacked out her arms because it was, you know, skin.
Okay, this is 100% the after show. This is what we're doing for the after show. I'm gonna hang up. We're gonna end on that note.